It all started like any other luxury flight. The soft hum of the engines echoed like a calming lullaby through the cabin. The warm, comforting scent of freshly brewed coffee drifted through first class, blending with hints of vanilla from the premium air freshening system. Everything looked perfect: polished champagne glasses, plush cream-colored seats, elegant lighting, and passengers already getting cozy with pillows and magazines. People in first class expected a peaceful, effortless experience, a place where you could sink into a leather seat and forget the rest of the world. Businessmen were adjusting their expensive watches and opening laptops, wealthy couples were whispering about their next vacation stops, and everyone seemed to belong. Among these well-dressed passengers sat a woman named Claire. She considered herself a sophisticated, elite traveler with a taste for expensive things. She wore a designer blazer, flashy diamond earrings, and carried a handbag worth thousands of dollars. She sat with perfect posture, holding a glass of sparkling water like she was royalty. In her mind, flying first class wasn't just a choice, it was her status. She believed that this section of the plane was reserved for people like her, rich, stylish, and polished. Claire scanned the cabin with a satisfied smirk, until her eyes landed on one particular passenger across the aisle. A young woman sat quietly by the window, wearing a loose, oversized gray hoodie, black jeans, and simple white sneakers. Her blonde hair was tied up in a messy bun, and she wore large dark sunglasses that covered most of her face. She looked relaxed, almost too relaxed for Claire's liking. With one leg tucked under the other, she sipped from a cup of tea and gently scrolled on her phone, as if she were sitting on her couch at home watching Netflix. Claire raised an eyebrow. What kind of person dresses like that in first class? To her, it looked sloppy. Disrespectful, even. The stranger wasn't wearing any noticeable designer brands or jewelry, didn't have a shiny laptop open, and wasn't talking to anyone about business or luxury cars. Claire leaned back in her chair and scoffed under her breath. This is first class, not a college dorm room. She checked her phone and opened her social media feed. People these days don't even try to look decent, she whispered to herself, glancing again at the girl with mild disgust. What Claire didn't realize, however, was that this quiet young woman in the hoodie happened to be one of the most famous and powerful celebrities in the world, an international superstar worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Taylor Swift herself. But Claire didn't recognize her, not like this. Not without glamorous makeup, a red carpet gown, flashing cameras, or bodyguards surrounding her. Taylor had dressed comfortably to travel peacefully, hoping to get through the flight unnoticed. She looked like any ordinary young woman trying to enjoy a private moment. Claire continued sneaking judgmental glances across the aisle. The more she looked, the more annoyed she felt. The stranger wasn't doing anything wrong, but to Claire, it just didn't fit her idea of who should be sitting in luxury. She felt irritated that someone who looked so plain was enjoying the same service she had paid top dollar for. As a flight attendant walked by offering drinks, Taylor softly said, "Could I please have some tea when you get a chance?" She spoke kindly and politely. "Of course," the attendant said with a warm smile. Claire rolled her eyes dramatically. "Some people really think they're special, huh?" she muttered, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. The young woman didn't respond. She simply smiled gently and looked out the window, taking a slow, calming breath. She wasn't bothered, and in fact, she was used to it. Taylor traveled often and knew that staying humble and silent was always the best way to avoid unnecessary dramas. But Claire's attitude didn't stop there. When Taylor thanked the attendant for the tea, Claire scoffed again. "You'd think you could at least dress properly in first class," she said in a snobby tone, pretending to be speaking to the passenger beside her. The stranger next to Claire looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Meanwhile, Taylor took a sip of her tea, checked something on her phone, and opened a small notebook. Maybe she was writing lyrics. Maybe she was planning her next concert. No one around her had a clue, but her calmness only fueled Claire's quiet irritation. Minutes went by like this. Claire occasionally glared. Taylor remained peaceful. The energy in that corner of the cabin was heavy with silent judgment. Little did Claire know, she was sitting just a few feet away from Taylor Swift, the very icon she had probably heard on the radio or seen on magazine covers. The same woman who had sold out stadiums and inspired millions of fans around the globe. Taylor Swift wasn't just a celebrity, she was the owner of the private jet company's top-tier membership, someone who could buy and sell 100 seats like the one they were sitting in without blinking. But Claire was too caught up in appearances to realize the truth. And soon, her arrogance was going to catch up with her in the most shocking way imaginable. The moment seemed ordinary at first. A flight attendant with a polished smile and neat uniform rolled her service cart quietly down the aisle, the delicate clinking of silverware and glasses filling the air. She stopped at the seat where the woman in the oversized hoodie sat, lowered her voice politely, and asked, "Would you like your meal now, or should I bring it later?" Taylor looked up briefly, her sunglasses hiding most of her expression, and offered a soft, almost shy smile. "If it's all right, could I have it later? I'm not very hungry yet." "Of course, ma'am." "No problem at all," the attendant said kindly, noting it down. But across the aisle, Claire's eyes narrowed. To her, this simple request sounded entitled, even rude. She let out a dramatic sigh, set her glass of sparkling water a little too firmly on the tray table, and muttered just loud enough for several nearby passengers to hear. "Some people think the world revolves around them." The words cut through the calm cabin air like a knife. Heads turned slightly. A businessman raised an eyebrow. A young couple glanced at each other. And the target of the remark, Taylor, heard it clearly. Taylor didn't flinch. She merely glanced up for a split second, her lips pressing together in the faintest smile, before lowering her gaze back to her phone. Her fingers scrolled slowly, her posture relaxed, as if the comment hadn't even reached her. But inside, she noticed. She always noticed. Claire, however, took Taylor's silence as arrogance. She leaned closer to her seatmate, lowering her voice just enough to pretend she wasn't trying to be overheard. But the bitterness in her tone carried across the aisle anyway. "First class is for people who belong here," she whispered sharply. "Not for people trying to get a free upgrade." Her seatmate, an older woman with kind eyes, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She gave a nervous little chuckle, not wanting to engage. But her awkward laugh did nothing to discourage Claire, who took it as agreement. Meanwhile, Taylor remained calm. Her lips curled ever so slightly into a half-smile, not a mocking one, but the kind of smile that came from someone who had heard worse and chosen peace instead of reaction. She adjusted her blanket, took another sip of tea, and looked out the window at the clouds. What Claire didn't realize was that Taylor had mastered this kind of moment. Fame had taught her that reacting to insults only gave them more power. She had been judged by critics, ridiculed by strangers, and misunderstood countless times in the public eye. What was one arrogant passenger compared to that? And yet, there was something almost amusing about it. Claire's words didn't sting, they revealed more about her than they ever could about Taylor. That faint smile on Taylor's lips was a sign, she wasn't hurt. She was simply waiting. Passengers nearby, however, weren't so calm. Ethan, the businessman seated just behind Claire, instantly recognized Taylor despite the hoodie and sunglasses. He almost dropped his magazine when he heard Claire's insult. He stared in disbelief, wondering, does this woman have any idea who she's talking about? Ethan wanted to say something, to lean forward and correct Claire, but he stopped himself. He was curious. How would Taylor handle this? Would she reveal herself? Would she call out the insult? Or would she, like the superstar he admired, rise above it with grace? The atmosphere shifted. What should have been an uneventful meal service was now a quiet theater of tension. Some passengers pretended not to listen, but their ears were sharp. Even the flight attendant, still pushing the cart further down the aisle, glanced back nervously. Claire, emboldened by Taylor's silence, smirked smugly to herself. She adjusted her diamond bracelet, tossed her hair back, and whispered again, this time louder, as if trying to convince the entire cabin of her opinion. Honestly, first class used to mean something. Now, anyone in sweatshirts and sneakers can just waltz in like they're special. The words stung, not because Taylor cared about the judgment, but because they revealed a deeper truth. Claire thought money or appearance defined worth. To Taylor, that kind of thinking was the real ugliness. Taylor didn't respond. Not yet. She folded her notebook, slipped her phone into her hoodie pocket, and rested her chin on her hand as if enjoying the quiet of the flight. But that slight smile remained, like a secret she wasn't ready to share. Across the aisle, Claire mistook that silence for weakness. She leaned back confidently, sipping her sparkling water like it was champagne. She believed she had made her point, that she had reminded this ordinary-looking girl of her place. But the truth was far different. Claire had no idea that the very woman she was mocking was one of the wealthiest, most successful artists in the world. She had no idea that Taylor wasn't just a passenger, she was, in fact, someone who could easily buy this entire jet and a dozen more like it. And the most ironic part? Taylor wasn't hiding because she was ashamed. She was hiding because sometimes, being ordinary was the greatest luxury in the world. The faint smile on her lips was her quiet promise, when the truth comes out, it won't be me who feels small. For now, though, Taylor sat peacefully, letting the insult hang in the air like smoke, knowing it wouldn't be long before it disappeared, and the one choking on it wouldn't be her. The flight had been calm for the most part, the steady hum of the engines blending with the occasional clink of glasses and rustle of newspapers. But tension was building like a storm cloud. Midway through the flight, as the attendants made their rounds again, the same male flight attendant, the one who had been curt with Taylor earlier, stopped at her seat. His face looked tight, his tone sharp, and his patience thin. "Miss," he said in a voice that carried through the cabin, "please remember this is a shared flight. You can't act like you own the place." The words dropped like a bomb. The soft chatter in the cabin died instantly. The businessman behind them froze with his magazine half open. A young couple looked up from their movie. Even Claire, who had been simmering with silent smugness, widened her eyes in surprise. Taylor, however, didn't look angry. She didn't look offended. Instead, she paused, set her tea gently down on the tray table, and slowly turned toward the attendant. For the first time, she moved her sunglasses down, revealing those unmistakable, world-famous blue eyes. Eyes that had graced magazine covers, stadium screens, and music videos seen by millions. The cabin collectively inhaled. Taylor leaned back in her seat, tilting her head slightly. A small, amused smile spread across her lips, the kind of smile that said she'd been waiting for exactly this moment. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said softly, her voice calm but filled with quiet power. "Maybe I should have told you earlier." She let the silence hang for just a beat, then added, "I actually do own this plane." The attendant blinked, confusion flashing across his face. His smirk faltered. "What?" he asked, his voice weaker now. Taylor didn't break eye contact. She reached into her leather bag, pulled out her phone, and tapped a few times with steady fingers. After a moment, she held the screen up for him to see. It was an email, clearly marked with the letterhead of the private charter company. The subject line was bold and undeniable: confirmation of ownership transfer, Gulfstream jet, tail number. Taylor tapped the screen again and scrolled down to her name, listed as the official owner. "This jet was purchased last month," she explained, her voice steady and casual, as if she were reading the weather. "It's mine. I let the company manage private charters on it when I'm not using it. Today, I just decided to fly on it myself." She leaned back again, folding her hands in her lap, calm as ever. The attendant's face drained of color. His lips parted, but no words came out. The arrogance that had coated his tone moments earlier was gone. Around the cabin, the reaction was immediate. A ripple of whispers spread among the passengers like wildfire. "Wait, she owns the jet. Did she just say she bought this plane? Is that Taylor Swift? One man, unable to contain himself, let out a sharp laugh. Oh my God, unbelievable, he said, shaking his head. Ethan, the businessman who had recognized her earlier, nearly grinned from ear to ear. He had been waiting for this. Watching the smug attendant shrivel under Taylor's calm revelation was more satisfying than any movie twist. Claire, however, sat frozen. Her jaw slackened, her face pale. She looked from Taylor to the attendant, then back to Taylor, as if trying to piece together what she had just heard. The woman she had mocked, called out for dressing too casually, and for not belonging in first class, was not only Taylor Swift, one of the biggest stars in the world, but also the actual owner of the very jet they were sitting in. The irony was so sharp it almost hurt. The attendant swallowed hard. I had no idea, he stammered, his voice trembling now. His hands fidgeted with the service cart handle as he avoided Taylor's eyes. Taylor didn't raise her voice. She didn't humiliate him further. Instead, she gave a small, graceful smile and said, "That's the thing. You never know who you're speaking to. So it's always better to be kind." The silence that followed was deafening. Her words weren't loud, but they carried more weight than any scolding ever could. The entire cabin felt the sting, not just the attendant. Claire shifted uncomfortably in her seat, wishing she could disappear into the cushion. From then on, the atmosphere of the flight completely shifted. The same attendant who had been arrogant was now overly polite, bowing his head slightly as he offered anything Taylor might need. Water, food, blankets, he suddenly seemed eager to make up for his mistake. The other passengers sat straighter, sneaking respectful glances at Taylor but not daring to bother her. Ethan leaned back in his chair, shaking his head in quiet amusement. He couldn't wait to tell this story later, the time Taylor Swift was insulted on her own plane and handled it with grace. As for Taylor, she returned to her calm demeanor. She put her sunglasses back on, sipped her tea again, and looked out the window at the clouds rolling by. To her, it was just another flight. Another reminder that true power didn't come from boasting or showing off, it came from staying calm until the right moment revealed the truth for you. The hum of the engines filled the silence again, but the energy in the cabin had changed completely. Everyone knew they'd just witnessed something unforgettable, something they would be talking about long after the plane touched down. And for the flight attendant, the lesson was crystal clear: never judge someone by appearances. Because sometimes, the person you think doesn't belong might just own the very world you're standing in. An hour into the flight, the cabin had settled into a quiet rhythm. The hum of the engines was steady, a white noise backdrop to the clink of cutlery and the soft chatter of passengers. Some read magazines, others reclined with their headphones, and a few sipped wine as they gazed out at the endless stretch of sky. Taylor, still in her hoodie and sunglasses, had curled up slightly in her window seat. She seemed at peace, her notebook balanced on her lap as she scribbled a few words here and there, pausing often to sip her tea. It was an ordinary, almost invisible moment, one she was grateful for. At least, until she felt a chill in the air. Taylor glanced around discreetly. The air conditioning seemed to be blowing a little harder now. Quietly, without fuss, she pressed the call button for the attendant. A moment later, one of the flight crew arrived, smiling warmly. "Could I trouble you for a blanket?" Taylor asked gently. "Of course, ma'am." "One moment," the attendant replied, returning quickly with a folded blanket. She handed it over with both hands, her demeanor professional and polite. Taylor thanked her softly and unfolded the blanket, wrapping it around her shoulders. She leaned back into her seat, cozy now, ready to return to her notes. But across the aisle, Claire couldn't resist. She tilted her head, smirked, and let out an exaggerated sigh. "Honestly," Claire said in a tone dripping with disdain, loud enough for half the cabin to hear, "this isn't a hotel lounge. Some people just don't know how to act in first class." The words sliced through the peaceful cabin like a blade. A few passengers turned their heads, brows furrowed. Some shifted in discomfort, unsure of whether to respond or remain silent. Taylor didn't react. She calmly tucked the blanket around her, as though Claire's words had never been spoken. But others noticed. Ethan, the businessman seated directly behind Claire, had been observing quietly since the beginning. A seasoned traveler, he knew when arrogance was about to cross the line. And now, he recognized the woman in the hoodie. He'd seen her face on billboards, on television, at award shows. Even disguised in casual clothes, there was no mistaking her. Taylor Swift, he thought, stunned. One of the most successful artists of all time, sitting just a few feet away. And Claire was treating her like she didn't belong. Ethan clenched his jaw, tempted to intervene. But something told him not to. Taylor wasn't helpless, far from it. He had a feeling she was letting this play out on purpose, her calmness a shield stronger than any words. Claire, meanwhile, was pleased with herself. She leaned back smugly in her seat, sipping her drink as though she'd just won some unspoken battle. The stranger in the hoodie hadn't answered back, which in her mind, meant she was right. But the illusion was about to shatter. Not long after, one of the senior flight attendants approached Taylor's seat again. This time, the conversation was softer, more discreet, almost businesslike. The attendant bent down slightly and asked, "Miss Swift, just to confirm, your driver will be waiting at the VIP terminal upon arrival. Would you like security to escort you directly, or would you prefer to handle press photos first?" Taylor's reply was quiet, polite. "Direct escort, please. I'll save press for later this evening. Timing's important today." The attendant nodded with a smile. "Of course. We'll make sure everything is arranged." The words weren't meant for anyone else. They were delivered discreetly, almost in a whisper. But in the close quarters of first class, they traveled further than intended. And Claire heard every syllable. Her glass nearly slipped from her hand. Driver? Security? Press? She blinked rapidly, her mind racing. Who on earth needed that kind of arrangement? Who spoke casually about security teams and press appearances as if it were part of their daily schedule? Claire tilted her head ever so slightly, sneaking a closer look at the woman across the aisle. Something about the voice, the grace, the ease with which she handled herself, it all suddenly seemed familiar. Press. Security. What is she talking about? Claire whispered to herself, confusion lacing her words. Her seatmate shifted, uncomfortable again. Maybe she's someone important, the woman suggested gently. Important? In a hoodie? Claire scoffed, but her voice trembled now, betraying her uncertainty. Her confidence, which had seemed unshakable moments before, was beginning to crack. Doubt crawled in, slow and unwelcome. Meanwhile, Ethan smirked to himself. He could almost see the wheels turning in Claire's mind as she tried to connect the dots. He wondered how long it would take before the realization struck her. Taylor, still wrapped in her blanket, remained composed. She thanked the attendant again, adjusted her sunglasses, and returned to her notebook, as though nothing unusual had been said. But the atmosphere had shifted. The insults that once felt so cutting now seemed fragile, laughable even. The cabin was no longer Claire's stage, it was Taylor's, even if she hadn't claimed it outright. Claire sat stiffly, eyes darting toward the woman she had mocked, suddenly unsure of herself. Her earlier words echoed in her mind, "First class is for people who belong here." And for the first time, she wondered if she had just insulted someone who belonged here far more than she ever could. It happened as the plane began its slow descent. The seatbelt sign dinged overhead, and the captain's calm voice came through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our approach. Please return to your seats, fasten your belts, and prepare for landing. We'll be on the ground shortly." The energy in the cabin shifted. Passengers tucked away their books, powered down laptops, and slid half-finished glasses of wine back onto tray tables. The quiet hum of routine filled the air as flight attendants moved down the aisles, securing overhead bins and checking seatbelts. Among them was the same senior attendant who had served Taylor throughout the flight. Unlike his colleague, this one carried warmth in her voice and professionalism in her smile. She stopped by Taylor's seat, bending slightly so only she could hear, though her words still carried farther than she intended. "Miss Swift," she said softly, "your driver will meet you at the VIP terminal as usual. Security is already waiting outside. Would you like us to escort you directly to the car?" And just like that, the name slipped into the air. Claire froze. Her eyes went wide. Her breath caught in her throat. "Wait. Swift," she whispered, louder than she meant to. She leaned forward in her seat, staring across the aisle. "As in Taylor Swift? The Taylor Swift?" The air around them seemed to pause. For the first time in hours, Taylor turned fully toward her. She slowly reached up, removed her sunglasses, and revealed those unmistakable eyes, sharp yet kind, the same ones fans had seen on album covers, stadium screens, and music videos that played around the world. She smiled warmly at Claire, not with arrogance, but with the calm composure of someone who didn't need to prove anything. "Yes," Taylor said gently. "That's me." Claire's jaw nearly hit the floor. Her carefully rehearsed air of superiority evaporated in an instant. The woman she had mocked for wearing a hoodie, insulted for asking for a blanket, dismissed as someone who didn't belong in first class, was Taylor Swift, one of the most famous women alive. I didn't know," she stammered, her face flushing red. She gripped the armrest as though the plane itself were spinning. Taylor's smile never faltered. Her voice was steady, patient, even kind. "That's the thing," she said softly, her tone carrying through the now silent cabin. "You never really know who someone is. Which is why it's always better to be kind." The words lingered like music in the air. Ethan, seated just behind them, had been holding in laughter for nearly half the flight. Now he nearly lost it. He covered his mouth, his shoulders shaking as he tried not to burst out. The look on Claire's face, pure shock, embarrassment, and disbelief, was almost too much to handle. Around the cabin, whispers erupted. "She's really Taylor Swift. I knew she looked familiar. Unbelievable, she was right here the whole time." The young couple from earlier leaned forward for a better look, their eyes wide with wonder. The businessman across the aisle shook his head in amazement, muttering something about grace under pressure. Even the once smug passengers in the back were craning their necks to see. Claire, on the other hand, wanted to disappear. She tugged nervously at her blazer, her confidence crumbling like sand slipping through fingers. Her earlier words replayed in her mind, "First class is for people who belong here." The irony stung so deeply she could hardly breathe. She opened her mouth again, trying to salvage the moment. "I didn't mean. I wasn't trying to." But Taylor raised a hand ever so slightly, not in anger, but in quiet reassurance. "It's all right," she said softly. "I don't take it personally. But sometimes, moments like this are a good reminder for all of us." Her calmness, her lack of spite, made the moment even more powerful. She wasn't angry. She wasn't vengeful. She was simply graceful, teaching a lesson without even trying. The plane dipped lower, the city lights glimmering faintly below as the runway approached. Passengers adjusted their belts, but no one's focus was on the landing anymore. Every eye lingered on Taylor Swift, the woman who had sat quietly in their midst for hours, enduring insult after insult without losing her composure. Ethan leaned back in his seat, shaking his head with a grin. She handled that perfectly, he thought. He knew he'd be telling this story for years, the day Taylor Swift revealed herself mid-flight and shut down arrogance with nothing but kindness. As the wheels touched the runway with a soft thud, Claire sank into her seat, wishing the ground would swallow her whole. She stared straight ahead, cheeks burning, unable to look at Taylor again. Taylor, meanwhile, adjusted her hoodie, slid her sunglasses back on, and prepared to step into the next part of her busy day. To her, this was just another flight. Another reminder that humility outshines pride, and kindness silences cruelty better than anger ever could. When the doors finally opened and passengers began gathering their belongings, Taylor stood gracefully, thanked the crew with genuine warmth, and stepped toward the exit. Security was waiting, just as arranged. She offered one last smile to the cabin, then disappeared down the jet bridge, leaving an unforgettable silence in her wake. And for everyone on that flight, especially Claire, it was a lesson carved in memory: you never know who's sitting next to you, who you're speaking to, or whose story you're walking into. Which is why, in the end, it's always better to be kind. The cabin lights brightened as the plane taxied toward the gate. Overhead bins opened, bags were pulled down, and the low rumble of passengers preparing to disembark filled the air. Yet despite the normal bustle of landing, a strange quiet still lingered around one section of first class, the row where Taylor Swift sat, her presence now unmistakably revealed. Claire's hands fidgeted with the strap of her purse. Her polished exterior, the carefully crafted image of a sophisticated traveler, had cracked. She glanced sideways at Taylor, then back down at her lap, her cheeks still burning from the revelation. Finally, gathering what little courage she had left, Claire leaned slightly toward Taylor. Her voice wavered. "I'm so sorry," she began, words tumbling out quickly. "I didn't mean to insult you. If I had known." Taylor turned her head gently, her expression calm but firm. She raised a hand, cutting Claire off, but not harshly. Her voice carried the same warmth it always had. "It's okay," Taylor said softly. "I don't hold grudges. But remember, kindness costs nothing. And it makes the journey better for everyone." The word struck like a gentle hammer. Not loud. Not cruel. Just undeniable. Claire swallowed hard, her throat dry. She nodded quickly, cheeks flushed redder than ever. She mumbled another apology, quieter this time, before sinking back into her seat, staring at the floor as though it might open and swallow her whole. For her, the rest of the flight, the final few minutes as the plane rolled to a stop, felt like an eternity. Taylor, on the other hand, was as serene as ever. She adjusted her hoodie, slipped her sunglasses back on, and rose smoothly as the seatbelt sign dinged off. She gathered her simple carry-on bag, thanked the flight attendants with genuine warmth, and offered a small smile to a few passengers nearby. Then, without looking back, she stepped off the plane. Waiting just outside the jet bridge was her driver and a pair of security guards, ready to escort her through the VIP terminal and into a waiting black car. She vanished from view as quickly as she had appeared, leaving behind a silence that was almost reverent. For the first-class passengers, the story was already forming in their minds. They hadn't just shared a flight with Taylor Swift, they'd witnessed a moment that spoke volumes about character, humility, and grace under pressure. No one felt that lesson more deeply than Claire. She sat frozen for a moment, watching the empty space where Taylor had been. Her earlier arrogance replayed in her head like a cruel echo. The eye rolls. The whispered insults. The dismissive scoffs. Each memory made her wince harder than the last. She realized now how foolish it had been to judge someone by their clothes, their quietness, or their lack of flashy presence. She had mistaken humility for unworthiness, and in doing so, she had humiliated herself. When Claire finally stepped off the plane, she kept her head down. The weight of what had happened clung to her, heavier than her designer bag. But in that weight, there was also a strange clarity. She knew she would never again assume that appearances told the whole story. Meanwhile, Ethan, the businessman who had watched the entire exchange unfold, walked out of the terminal shaking his head in amazement. Later that evening, over dinner with friends, he couldn't help but share the story. "You wouldn't believe it," he said, eyes wide with excitement. Taylor Swift was sitting right there in first class. Hoodie, messy bun, the whole thing. Some woman gave her a hard time the entire flight. And you know how Taylor responded? With pure class. She never snapped, never got nasty, she just let it roll off her back. Then, when the truth came out, she taught us all a lesson in the calmest, kindest way possible. His friends leaned in, fascinated. Ethan went on. It reminded me that true class isn't about what you wear, how loud you are, or even where you sit on a plane. It's about how you treat the people around you. That's the real measure of who belongs. The story spread quickly within his circle, and eventually beyond. Each retelling seemed to add to the legend of that flight, a superstar in disguise, an arrogant passenger brought low, and a lesson in kindness that no one could forget. As for Claire, the memory never left her. She replayed it in her mind often, sometimes with embarrassment, sometimes with gratitude. What had started as her most humiliating flight had also become the most important. She stopped making assumptions about people based on appearances. She learned to listen more, judge less, and remind herself daily of Taylor's words, kindness costs nothing, and it makes the journey better for everyone. She even told close friends about it, not proudly, but honestly. I made a fool of myself once, she would admit, and I was lucky enough to be reminded, in the best way, why kindness matters more than anything. Because in the end, Claire realized something that every passenger on that flight understood: sometimes the stranger sitting next to you isn't just another traveler. Sometimes, there's someone extraordinary, someone capable of teaching you a lesson that stays with you long after the seatbelt light turns off. And sometimes, that stranger in the hoodie might just be one of the most famous women in the world. A woman whose fame wasn't the important part at all. What mattered most was the grace she carried, and the reminder she left behind.